Bungalow Bill here, and welcome back to From the Depths. A few weeks ago, I feel like it was now, I mentioned that I was looking into what was the most firepower or DPS efficiency per cost that I was able to find in the game, outside of course, melee weapons. And I was just playing around with it to see if I could do something useful. In this case, well, naturally, it's missiles that are entirely payload. They beat, at least in terms of DPS, per cost, they beat 3D crams like the 6 pellet connection Tetris at a ratio of about 2 to 1. So definitely a lot of benefit to be had there. And in reality, really, if I was to make one of these a magnet, I wouldn't lose too much. But sort of the fun thing is to really try to min-max it to see how much I can get out of it. So the first thought that I was playing around with is, well, you can get the ejection speed of these pretty high. So this is 200 meters per second. And if I put something else on this that had a speed of 200 meters per second, the muzzle velocity, I could get the AI to aim things for the trajectory of, APS or something like that. Turns out to not work that well. And the reason is because missiles have drag. They have a lot of drag, actually. So you see it doesn't weathercock, so it will hold a 30-degree angle forever, and the drag is dependent on the angle that it's moving, so at this point it's just falling straight down. It basically goes in it's a little bit more complicated than this, but it basically goes in a straight line for a while, and then goes straight down for a while. And, it made it a respectable distance, but it's not an amazingly useful trajectory. Basically, shooting it up more than a few degrees isn't terribly useful, which kind of relegates it to basically being a melee weapon. Effective range was here, about 281 meters, that it was direct fire for. So, I'm left with a few options, basically. And, one of them is, of course, as mentioned before, well, I could just use magnet bomb, or magnet mines. Cost, for this particular setup, 25% of the firepower. Maybe with different sized missiles, I could reduce that a little bit. They have some downsides. Again, these do not weathercock. So if I make magnet bombs, I'm basically restricted to explosive or EMP payload, or 180-degree frag. The issue for that being that it won't point towards the enemy, so if the frag cone's not 180 degrees, it's not terribly useful. However, if they're impacting nose first, I can also use the heat nose, which is definitely something that can be highly effective against some enemies. I've still gone with frag, though. So the solution that I went with was, of course, the more fun one. I went and took my APN guidance breadboard, tacked a few decorations onto it so that it does bombing run passes instead of actually colliding with the enemy. The reason it has to be APN guidance is because of the lack of weathercocking and the high amount of drag dependent on the angle of incidence. Means that if this fires more than a few degrees out of true with the velocity vector of the craft, it's highly unreliable because of the amount of drag that's on it. So I basically tilted this down enough to clear these guys, although, I could have put them up here, but clear these guys and to let me hit a craft without tilting that close to it. Okay, so I didn't exactly explain the reason that it has to be an APN breadboard for this craft. The reason it has to be an APN breadboard is because I need an intercept with the target. I can't originally I was going to rely on this turret to just sort of pick an aim point on the enemy vehicle and then launch these missiles out at a high velocity when I got close to hit it. It turns out that the variableness to the drag, once the angle for this goes past about 20 degrees, is so high that it's not really feasible. And for even moderately fast ships like the Iron Maiden, which is 30 meters per second, I was having extreme difficulty hitting it using just one of the built-in bombing run AIs because they don't do any sort of target intercept. So let's peel this vehicle back a little bit. And basically, it's a lot of missiles. It's missiles, basically enough ammo storage to run it. A little short, but it's pretty close. Very small AI. Some targeting, which will get absolutely blown up if this gets taken out, but it can share with other vehicles, so just need some of them to work. Some jets that turn it based on thrust vectoring. The layout for this jets is a little bit suspect because in particular it has to do with where the center of mass is for this craft. It's in a slightly awkward place. These jets are not perfectly balanced around it. So if it tries to yaw by cutting these two to half throttle, it pitches slightly. In addition, for roll, I actually changed the pitch angle of these jets, which effectively reduces the amount of thrust that I have going down here, which will make it pitch down a little bit. It's not super noticeable, but there are some slight control couplings in this craft, and it makes it hard to get it incredibly dialed in. The alternate way to build this is, instead of putting these missiles on a sub-object, is to build them into the hull of the craft, and then to make it so that they kind of drop as bombs, which is actually very challenging to do, but it is possible with enough tweaking. The issue is they have a tendency to get tangled up in the gantries, but with just the right ejection angle and ejection speed, you can get it to work. In retrospect, if I was going to build this craft again, I would probably do that. And in addition, to sort of balance out the thrust a little bit, I would probably build it sort of an X-Wing style with folding wings, so that all these jets would be on sub-objects. The thing wouldn't take up that much space with them in the stowed position for an aircraft carrier. And then when it's time for it to do other stuff, bomb things, folds the wings out, be able to do the thrust vectoring it needs to do, that kind of stuff, it would make it more delicate. One of the constraints for me as well was being able to pack this onto a carrier. So if I pack this completely nose up, this takes up very little room. It's about 6 blocks tall, I think 9 blocks wide. So you can put a lot of these on a carrier, although they will need some space between them so they don't bump. And I also wanted it to be moderately armored, so it doesn't just completely explode. But there's only so much armor I'm going to get when I want it to be fairly maneuverable, cheap, 15.5k materials, a lot of firepower because it's just pure payload on the bombs, and only 10% armor cost. This one does not currently have evasion turned on. There is evasion in the breadboard, and I've been spending a while tuning this. I will tune the evasion component for this when I actually put it on something. This is unfortunately a lot more complicated than it needs to be. There's a lot of quality of life improvements to breadboards that have been added recently that let me not have to do a lot of this garbage. And also, if I was really careful about the coordinate systems that everything was done in, as well as what some of their transform matrices do exactly as far as their conventions, I could use all of that stuff instead of, writing my own change of basis matrices and that sort of stuff. A lot of the stuff is just changing things from one coordinate system to another, but there's a little evasion thing in here. It's built into the APN guidance component, so, when it's doing direct guidance, it doesn't do it, but it's better than nothing. And a comparatively small bombing run thing. This does basically the whole bombing run stuff. So, just for the purpose of a demo, I'm going to put it on God mode, spawn in something that is we'll go with something easy to hit first. Let's let it not shoot back, because that's going to be terribly disappointing. And we'll look. So we're climbing to our dive bombing altitude on the run in. we're actually taking a waypoint that's above the craft and using it for APN guidance. Come down, drop the bombs, and we're on our way. It's time-based, so it'll retreat for, I believe it's 11 seconds, and then come back. It usually reloads right before it makes it to the enemy vehicle. So, turns around, gets a new waypoint above the enemy vehicle. Release bombs. Now, it will always try to bomb the same place. It's trying to bomb about right here in the middle of the enemy vehicle, because that's just sort of a restriction of breadboards. You currently can't, as far as I'm aware, you simply can't get the actual aim points for your weapons or the bounding box for this craft. If I could get the whole bounding box, I could, for each bombing run, choose a different point. And if I indexed it by bombing run rather than making it random, if I had a bunch of these bombers, they would all go for the same place on every pass, which would be kind of cool. So I'm going to spawn in a few more of these because it's fun. But spawning them this close might actually cause issues. Oh yeah. Well, it hit first. But I'm intending to put these on a carrier that is to be built for adventure mode. And, well, have something more to show after that. I'll do a little bit more tuning. Then this is more of a tech demo, because this is really fun. They don't crash into each other that much as long as they're staggered properly. I put them in God mode though because I want them to live long enough just in case there are any accidents to destroy one more vehicle after this. Well, you know, unless they're coming in opposite directions, I guess. Should have staggered them all from different sides. So, anyway, really fun. If, in retrospect, I should have made a custom breadboard for these that has a separate azimuth and elevation plane for the APN guidance. Or it's really just PN guidance for these. There's no acceleration term. Bonk. There's no acceleration term. Because these bombers kind of function in a plane, and I want them to have different behavior in the azimuth and elevation planes. This breadboard was built for a ramming vehicle, in particular something that's missile-shaped like an ICBM. And, well, it's pretty good for those purposes, where it's coordinate invariant. It doesn't matter which direction the missile is looking, so to speak, it'll have the same behavior. But not the best for bombing. And, well, once there's a big hole, it'll tend to miss a bit more. These always aim a little high to begin with, but this behavior makes them not great at really disabling a craft, because especially a lot of the Steel Striders vehicles have their weapon. Well, really every boat-like vehicle in this game has its weapons in the fore and aft sections of the vehicles. It is good at cutting long, narrow craft in half. Hopefully those two untangle from each other. With a few lucky hits, you can easily cut the Rhea directly in half. Well, not so easily, but some slightly longer and narrower vehicles I have cut in half. Actually, I have cut the Rhea in half as well. But because the Steel Striders craft have a tendency to have their AI right in the middle, the Rhea tends to get AI deaded before she gets cut in half. Some custom kind of battleships that I've also tested on player designs rather than faction designs have been much more susceptible to being cut in half. Another thing that would be kind of interesting would be to program these to always come in off of the stern. It would leave a much larger target. Okay, I'm gonna bomb one more vehicle for fun. You know, I spent a lot of time this weekend tweaking these things to make them even mildly functional. So, let's spawn in an oldie but goodie. Of course, I say that somewhat ironically. I know something that you might not if you're not playing on the alpha test branch. Its AI is, its anti-air is actually pretty good now, to the point where even with God mode on, I'm going to disable it. Oh, and she looks a bit different, doesn't she? She's actually pretty scary. Right, the firepower is kind of so high because they're pure HE crams, but yeah, still be careful with her. Quite a bit different from how she used to be. Her Sea-Wiz actually seems a little scary for bombers. Traditionally in Neater, you don't have to armor your bombers up that heavily as long as you have a larger craft to take the main gunfire from the enemies. The secondary guns are just not that great. I haven't really tested survivability against the new crossbones yet. It might actually be a little bit of a problem. Yeah, so actually cutting an enemy vehicle in half with dumb bombs that have to actually hit and or frag is a little challenging. It can happen. I've done it a few times while testing, but bonk. Yeah, they're gonna absolutely evaporate each other when they collide. And there we go. I'm gonna try to stagger their launch off of an aircraft carrier and hope that's enough. If it's not, well, maybe I'll just have them go in for repairs when they get that injured. My plan is, because they're only about 15k each, to put about 10 of these on a relatively cheap aircraft carrier, along with a few non-explosive Kitty Hawks. I know it's boring, but it is actually a real problem if you're trying to use them long-term off of a carrier, which will bring them back for repairs. So I'm going to make some non-explosive Kitty Hawks, as boring as that is. Well, anyway, that's it for today's episode. It's really as far as I've gone with these experiments. Actually, having played around with PN guidance in the breadboards a lot, and having just done the PN guidance thing for missiles, I realized from the comments that there's a few things I got wrong, and then playing with them later, a few even worse oversights in that video. Usually I catch a lot of factual errors when I do editing, and if there's too many, I just reshoot the video. That one kind of got through, I guess. So I am planning to take that one down and kind of. Well, that's interesting. I don't see them do that often. Take that one down and reshoot it and do a re-upload with something that's a little bit better. But until then, I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope to see you in the future.